Hello, everyone, and welcome to True Crime Man's Dark Imagination. I'm Alan Gotro, your host. If this is your first time here, hit the like button, subscribe, and the bell to be notified of future episodes. And if you like what you see, tell your friends about us. Despite rumors and a strong case for police corruption, the Keddie cabin murders of April 1981 left more questions than answers when identifying the assailant or assailants. Immediately upon ensuing an investigation, it appeared that the finger-pointing reached a fever pitch where focus on the objectives in the investigation seemed to get lost. Although no clear suspect stood out, but so many seemed to know the truth. With the election of a new sheriff and the dogged determination of one investigator, some believe the solution to this case may finally be at hand. On the side of State Route 70, on the way to Quincy in Northern California, a dilapidated wooden structure once stood that captured a brutal and tragic moment in time, an abode that reminded local residents of a most horrendous event. Glenna Susan Sue Sharp, seeking a change from an abusive marriage and also a safer environment for her children, separated from her husband Gary in July 1979. Since Gary was in the U.S. Navy and moved around a great deal, Sue wanted to provide stability for her children and end the treatment she received from her husband. She eventually moved, along with her 15-year-old son John, 14-year-old daughter Sheila, 12-year-old daughter Tina, and two younger sons Rick, aged 10, and 5-year-old son Greg, to Northern California from her Connecticut home, subsequently settling in cabin number 28 at the Keddie Cabins in Keddie, California. On April 11, 1981, all of Sue's children had plans with their friends. John was with his friend Dana in Quincy for part of the day, planning to go to a party that evening. His siblings were split between neighboring cabins during the day. Sheila and Tina were at Cabin 27, owned by the Seabolt family, while Rick and Greg were spending the afternoon playing with Justin in Cabin 26, owned by the Smart family. As nightfall approached, Rick and Greg came back home with Justin at Sue's insistence. The oldest sibling, John, was spotted with Dana in nearby Quincy trying to get a ride home, while the youngest daughter, Tina, also came back home to spend the night around 10 p.m. At approximately 7 a.m. on the morning of April 12, 1981, Sheila came home from her sleepover at the nearby cabin and let herself in as usual. She did not notice anything unusual at first, but when she entered the cabin, the sight that she witnessed was gory indeed. Within the gloomy cabin, Sheila stumbled across the blood-covered bodies of Sue, John, and Dana in the living room, all of them bound with cords and electrical tape. Sheila desperately searched for her other siblings to find them alive in an adjacent room, along with the friend Justin, but she could not find Tina. The police were immediately notified and showed up to start going through the scene. Sue, John, and Dana had been savagely stabbed with two different knives and beaten profusely with a hammer, the bloody weapons left behind at the scene. Further inspection of the bodies would then turn up an array of strange clues. Michael East, a freelance true crime journalist, stated, "The body of Sue was found lying on her side next to the sofa and half naked from the waist up, and she had been gagged with a blue bandana and her own panties stuffed into her mouth and secured with electrical tape, as well as covered with a yellow blanket. She had been stabbed in the chest, her throat had been cut wide open, and there was a wound made by a blunt object thought to have been the butt of a BB gun on her head. 15-year-old John Sharp was found to have had his wrist and ankles bound with electrical cord and medical tape, and his throat was slit as well. Dana was found face down on a pillow and had multiple head injuries, stab wounds, and had also been manually strangled. He was bound just like the others, and his feet were tied up with a cord that connected to John's bindings. There was no sign of Tina, but ample blood was found on the sheets in her room. In addition to the bodies, the walls had also been stabbed for reasons unknown, and a shoe print was found outside. Nothing had been stolen, but Tina's jacket, shoes, and a toolbox were missing from the cabin, as was one of the 2 hammers used in the killings. The drapes had been closed, and the telephone taken off the hook as well. Dana, John's friend, laid between Sue and John. He was face down on a pillow borrowed from the sofa. Bound with the same utilities as his mother and his friend, Dana was the only one who showed signs of being manually strangled. Although the living room displayed the gore of a bloodbath, only one other room in the cabin contained any blood, and that was Tina's room. There were 3 murder weapons that were discovered, 2 of which were lying next to the bodies in the living room, a knife and a hammer. After further investigation, a steak knife from Sue's kitchen was also found to be used for the murders. The knife was said to be used so aggressively that it was bent backwards. Investigators strongly surmised that 2 knives indicated the presence of another hammer at the crime scene, however, it was not found. Because of the amount of blood and the relatively controlled resistance on the part of the victims, it appeared to investigators at the scene that more than one assailant may have been responsible for the murders. Some witnesses claimed to have heard screaming and viewed a strange van in the area, and even interviews with the surviving boys brought no new information. One of the boys, Justin, claimed to have dreamed about the murders. He told police that he had seen Sue arguing with 2 strange men in the house, one with a mustache and short hair, the other clean-shaven with long hair, and they were both wearing glasses. These men had then apparently taken Tina away. This was considered a good lead, and composite sketches were made of the men based on Justin's description and widely distributed, but these turned up no new leads. Oddly, police had the sketches done by an amateur artist by the name of Harlan Embry, who had no formal training in forensic sketching. Considering the information and evidence up to that point, 6 suspects came to light. One of the possibilities was Marty Smart, their neighbor, as well as Rick and Greg's friend's stepfather. Although Rick and Greg slept through the murders, Justin was the only possible lead left. What complicated the reliance on young Justin's story is that dreaming about a crime is not the same as actually witnessing what happened, especially one so horrendous as that which occurred in cabin number 28. In desperation to follow the only lead, the investigating officer put the young boy under hypnosis to recount the dream. In his dream, Justin described 2 men present, stating one had a pocket knife that he used to stab Sue with, as well as a hammer, which was also found at the crime scene. He also saw Tina come out of the room because of the commotion, only to be carried away by one of the men who later returned without her. However, no one was sure if the men Justin saw were part of his imagination or if he actually witnessed their entering the cabin. With a case such as this, it became apparent that more technical means had to be employed in order to determine the perpetrators, as well as the whereabouts of young Tina. Local authorities invited the FBI to join the case. Further questioning of additional subsequent witnesses uncovered that they saw a brown Datsun parked at the cabin that evening, and others noted a green van. Additionally, witnesses reported that they saw John and Dana hitchhiking back to Keddie after their party, the time being at some point between 9 p.m. and 10 p.m. The assailants wore gloves, and it appeared the murders were seemingly well thought out as opposed to a momentary explosion of rage. In fact, were it not for the carnage, there was no evidence there had been intruders at all. Police rejected any theories of ritual murders and believed the killer or killers clung close to the scene. One of the Sharps' neighbors at Keddie Resort would become a focus of some interest in the case. His name became linked to the murders for nearly 40 years, that being Martin Smart, the stepfather of Justin Eason. Smart proved to be a very dangerous individual. Obsessed with the Bible and preaching about other people's loose morals, Smart was almost stereotypically hypocritical. In one incident in particular, following an argument with his father, he purchased bomb-making equipment to blow up his house. He tried to buy guns and was known to practice his skills utilizing a hatchet as a weapon. On several occasions, Smart attempted to murder his wife, Marilyn. Having recently lost his job as a cook, Martin was supporting his family by both selling and manufacturing hashish, being in control of a large-scale drugs house with his own runners. Having seemingly moved quickly in the drugs game, he likely felt he found his calling. Perhaps his quick aptitude was thanks to his friend, John Beau Boubidet. According to Martin, he and Boubidet had first become friends when the two men were patients together at the Veterans Administration Hospital in Reno, Nevada. Smart had attended the hospital while claiming to suffer from PTSD from his time serving in Vietnam. As Smart worked as a military cook during the war, he saw no combat. More than likely, Smart applied for whatever benefits he could milk from the government. After meeting at the hospital, Smart and Boubidet became inseparable, with Boubidet even moving into cabin 26 at Keddie alongside Martin and his wife. Marilyn didn't object, fearful of what her husband's reaction might be if she rejected the unexpected houseguest. While the focus of the investigation might well be Martin, it was likely Boubidet who called the shots in their odd relationship. He had convictions for bank robbery and breaking and entering and home invasion. Boubidet possessed links to the mafia and the notorious Chicago outfit made famous by Al Capone. However, while that may sound impressive, others say he was little more than a two-bit hoodlum. There is some debate over the nature of the relationship between the Smarts and Sue Sharp. Some say Sue was counseling Marilyn over her violent husband, attempting to convince her to flee as she had done. Others say that Martin Smart was, in fact, having an affair with Sue. Others still say both those facts are accurate. For her part, Sheila Sharp doesn't believe her mother would have been involved with a man like Smart, despite the fact that Martin had a reputation for playing away from home.
My mom's character has been subject to all manner of cruel suppositions, including accusations that she was a drug addict, a drug dealer, a prostitute, or at the very least an unfit mother. For the record, she was none of these things. She was a kind and loving mother who was doing her very best to raise 5 children alone. She was dutiful in her attention to each of us. And while we lived in relative poverty, we also lived in a home of love.
Interviewed following the murders, Martin Smart claimed that a claw hammer was missing from his cabin. Martin Smart's stepson, Justin Eason, gave conflicting accounts of his experience on the night of the murder, at first saying that he had dreamed of the events before later stating that he actually witnessed them. While undergoing hypnosis, Justin claimed that he heard sounds from the living room while watching television with Rick and Greg. Getting up to investigate, he allegedly saw 2 men with Sue, both wearing sunglasses. At first he described as having a mustache and short hair, and oppositely, the second being clean-shaven with long hair. During the confrontation, John and Dana arrived and a fight ensued. Tina walked in on the chaos and was bundled out of the back door by one of the men. Again, true crime journalist Michael East wrote, "Forensic hypnosis has been widely used by U.S. agencies since the Second World War. However, it has since been debunked by critics as a pseudoscience. Experts have said that there is no evidence that repressed memories actually exist, nor that memory can be improved over time. They also state that a witness can be easily led through suggestion, and reversely, hostile witnesses can direct the course of an investigation through easily perpetrated fraud while claiming to be under hypnosis." The sessions were conducted by the then County Sheriff Doug Thomas after he attended just 2 training sessions, and transcripts clearly show that Justin was led throughout the sessions. By April 29th, the FBI passed off the investigation to local authorities, stating that those involved were already doing an adequate job and their presence was unnecessary. That was until April 22nd, 1984. Strangely, exactly 3 years after she vanished from Keddie and over 100 miles away. A bottle collector by the name of Ronald Pedrini was walking in the woods near the hamlet of Feather Falls in the neighboring Butte County when he came across the part of a cranium, investigators later finding part of a mandible and eventually other bones. The remains belonged to Tina. She'd been dead since at least the previous autumn. Despite the find, the police continued in the same manner as it had since day one, with very little evidence springing off the pages of the case file. While many unsolved cases go cold simply because of a lack of evidence or the killers managing to cover their tracks, that was not the case with the Keddie cabin murders. And, in fact, arrests and prosecutions should undoubtedly have been made. While frustrated investigators faced a lack of resources, some believed that investigators were sabotaged by actors close to their own investigation. Marilyn Smart claimed that she found a blood-stained jacket belonging to Tina in the family basement and handed it to police, although no record of this discovery ever existed. The coat was found alongside a blanket, a pair of Levi's with a missing back pocket, and a used reel of surgical tape. Following the discovery of Tina Sharp's skull, police received an anonymous tip that the remains belonged to Tina before the pathologist had made a formal declaration. This call was recorded but never entered into evidence. It was found languishing at the bottom of a cardboard box at some point after 2013. In 2008, Marilyn Smart stated in a documentary on the case that her husband and John Bubiday were responsible for the murders, Martin having hated John Sharp. Marilyn stated she left a local bar around 11 p.m., leaving her husband and his friend still drinking. Around 2 a.m., she awoke at her house to find both men burning an item in a stove. Reports agree that Martin Smart and John Bubiday had arrived in Keddie's back door at 10 p.m. in the company of Marilyn, with separate reports suggesting they may have also been seen in the bar later wearing sunglasses and suits while being raucous. However, what many reports don't reveal is that Martin had asked Marilyn to invite Sue Sharp, with Bubiday having apparently taken the Shine tour. While it's likely that the romantic interest was actually on Martin's part, this would seem to contradict the claims that the killings were premeditated or that there was intense animosity between the four, despite Sue rejecting the invitation. Following the killings, Martin left both his wife and Keddie, traveling to Reno, Nevada. There he penned a letter to Marilyn which stated, "I've paid the price of your love, and now that I've bought it with 4 people's lives, you tell me we are through. Great. What else do you want?" Once again, the letter was never entered into evidence despite the police being aware of it. Sheriff Doug Thomas did not think Smart was a suspect, praising his cooperation and having provided endless clues that threw the suspicion away from him. Thomas pointed out the fact that the suspect had passed a polygraph test, and while this is true, in future conversations with a counselor, Smart said he beat it. The Keddie cabin murders remained a cold case until Plumas County elected a new sheriff, Greg Hagwood. Hagwood was a teenager at the time of the killings and knew the Sharp family personally, working on a painting crew at the county fair with John Sharp and Dana Wingate the previous summer. Hagwood re-interviewed some original witnesses, interviewed new ones, and recombed the case files. He even finally identified how John and Dana got home from the party they had attended, interviewing a woman who picked them up while hitchhiking. In 2016, Sheriff Hagwood discovered another murder weapon, another hammer, after authorities received an anonymous tip. This second hammer, which investigators had long known must have existed, was found in a local pond following a tip by a family member of John Bubiday. No matter how it was found, Hagwood acknowledged that it had been put there deliberately, stating that the location it was found, it would have been intentionally put there. It would not have been accidentally misplaced. Plumas County Special Investigator Mike Gamberg, who had been friends with Dana Wingate back in 1981, believes that Smart and Bubade were undoubtedly responsible for the killings. The alleged killers who lived here, did they have any problems with law enforcement prior? Yeah, both of them had records. Here are things that were done. But I think most importantly, there are things that were not done that are hard to explain. Hagwood and Gamberg both believed that the initial investigation into the murders had been ripe with police corruption. Gamberg believed that police strongly suggested that suspects leave the area instead of arresting and pressing those suspects for more information pertaining to the murders. Martin Smart held some admission of guilt, but investigators seemed to ignore those admissions. In fact, after Smart moved to Reno, Nevada, he allegedly confessed to the murders to a Veterans Administration officer. This officer then passed this information on to the Department of Justice, who in turn rendered the information to the FBI. Authorities under the previous sheriff simply ignored the information. This begs the question, when do incompetent investigators become complicit in a cover-up? While it may seem that Martin Smart and John Bubade are the likely killers at Keddie Cabin, it might not be so simple. In April of 2018, Mike Gamberg stated that DNA evidence from a piece of tape at the crime scene had been successfully linked to a living suspect. Martin Smart had died in 2000 and John Bubade in 1988. The presence of DNA linked to a living individual. Hagwood and Gamberg believe that the long-believed version of events recanted by Justin are unsound, and the real motive behind the case may be a kidnapping of Tina Sharp. Greg Hagwood stated, "If you kill 3 people in a front room and extract the little girl from a bedroom, a motive has to be attributed to her. There's no end to speculations on why." John E. Douglas, world-famous criminal profiler and head of the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit, shockingly believed that Tina may in fact have been involved with what transpired in the cabin. One of the first criminal profilers in the United States, Douglas thought that the killings were an afterthought and not premeditated, noting the domestic application of the weapons. Douglas stated, "Those determined to commit a crime had ready access to better tools. The crime was committed by a single individual, and Tina left intentionally. This person was likely involved in a relationship with the 12-year-old girl, having successfully groomed her. While the murders were never planned, once they happened, Tina was enlisted into assisting in the atrocity. The repositioning of the bodies and how Sue was covered and made decent. This care seemingly stands against the wanton and explosive violence." It was unknown whether Douglas was aware of Justin Eason claiming to be the one who had covered the body. Because of the conflicting and unreliable counts of Martin, Justin, and Marilyn, and almost everyone else associated with the case, it's not hard to feel a little of the frustration that might have faced investigators. Theories abounded. One of them surfaced implicating Bubade. Another theory stated that the agent sent to Keddie from the DOJ worked within the organized crime section rather than the homicide section. One can understand the frustration and confusion inhibited by investigators at the time of the initial investigation. Either way, Hagwood and Gamberg believed that more than 2 people were involved in the killings and that a wider conspiracy was a work to cover up the crimes involving at least 6 people. Former Sheriff Doug Thomas, during the course of the investigation, had been linked to Martin Smart in a way that made believable any connections between the two. Sheriff Thomas then stated, "Martin Smart was not a friend of mine. At one point, he and his wife were having marital problems, and they came to my office when I was sheriff and wanted me to counsel them. First of all, I had just gone through a divorce at the time. I told them, 'Why would you want me to counsel you?' There was no shortage of suspects, but suddenly now everybody, 35 or so years later, have all figured out what happened and that all of the investigating officers were corrupt. It's laughable, is what it is." After the statement by Sheriff Thomas, former investigator Hagwood stated, emphatically, "It is my belief that there were more than 2 people who were involved in the totality of the crime, the disposal of the evidence, and the abduction of the little girl. We're convinced that there are a handful of people that fit those roles who are still alive. I have a measure of confidence that we've identified some of them, and we're going to be coming. It could be next year, but really the focus and our priority is getting the truth, getting the answers." If the evidence and confessions truly existed, the killings in Cabin 28 seemingly had no reason not to be officially solved, with the guilt falling at the feet of Martin Smart. With both Smart and Bouvier now long dead, the chances for justice for Sheila, Rick, Greg, Tina, and Dana's family may seem both remote and hollow. Questions remain, and the official solution that has been offered doesn't entirely satisfy. Yet Greg Hagwood and Mike Gamberg are determined to offer that small piece of comfort, to cleanse the wound that was dealt to the entire community of Keddie, California. Soon after the murders, people in the cabin community began to place their properties up for sale and move away. In fact, the owners of the resort tried to sell the entire property, but there were no takers. The property fell into a massive state of repair, and homeless people overwhelmed the area. There were several attempts to rebuild the property, but all of these efforts went for naught. Finally, in 2004, Cabin 28 had been demolished. Similar to other brutal killings, the rumors of paranormal activity began almost immediately at Keddie Cabin number 28. Wherever there is trauma, it can be considered ripe for such paranormal activity. Teens would break into the cabins after the murders and attempted some rudimentary and possibly alcohol-induced seances. The truth is, the only specter found in Keddie cabins was the stain of the murders themselves. Gary Wingate, the father of victim Dana Wingate, gave a statement a few years ago when he said, "Nobody has the faintest idea who killed my son. So I, long ago, had to let this thing go or it would eat me alive. I don't think about it. I don't go to that ghost town and I have no idea if ghosts exist there. But I know this. There is evil in this world, and evil was in that house that night." What is certain is that the murders that occurred in cabin number 28 on that spring night of 1981 took more lives than the original crime. The demolition of the cabin would not take the pain and fear away from the area, and journalist Michael East profoundly stated, "Only the light of truth can finally cleanse Keddie of its real ghosts, those being the secrets buried for 40 years. Would the DNA on the tape finally reveal the identity or identities of those responsible from this heinous crime? We'll have to keep watch." If you'd like to support our channel, please find us at GoFundMe.com, Rumble.com, Buy Me a Cup of Coffee, and PayPal.com. I will leave the links below. Also, don't forget to give a visit to David and Krista Lynn Lab over at Fistful of Podcasts. I will also leave that link below. Until next time.